Beneath 10 feet of solid Arctic ice, a ghost silently tears through the abyss with reckless arrogance. The intruder believes that darkness is a perfect shield until 3:27 a.m. U.S. Navy sonar strikes like a sledgehammer, stripping away its stealth and pinning it in a kill zone. The Navy turns the enemy's own propeller signature into a noose, tightening the grip until the steel hull groans under lethal pressure. As the gap vanishes with every heartbeat, the intruder's frame begins to fracture under the brutal weight of the American intercept. In this split second, will one button erase the enemy forever? Or have they both been dragged into a nightmare with no way out? The nightmare didn't begin with an explosion. It started as a calculated gambit from the bitter halls of the Kremlin. After months of clandestine weapons shipments to Iran were strangled at the borders by the U.S. and its allies, Moscow was forced to shift gears. Plan B was activated, a desperate pivot from the scorching deserts of the Middle East to an entirely new theater, the White War Zone. Russia wasn't just looking for a win. They were hunting for redemption, a way to scrub away the shadow of their failure in Tehran. While Washington was distracted, pouring its strength into the Middle East, Russia quietly unleashed its ultimate trump card. The Belgorod, a nuclear-powered leviathan stretching over 600 feet and weighing more than 24,000 tons, slipped silently beneath the 10-foot-thick polar ice. The Belgorod didn't come alone. It carried the Harmony sensor grid and a swarm of stealth UUVs designed to weaponize the seabed and seal the Atlantic gateway. Their mission? Create a lethal A2AD bubble to sever NATO's jugular through the Denmark Strait. To the Kremlin, the previous U.S. military buildup in Greenland was a direct expansion of American influence, a shield that had to be shattered. They believed Washington was too distracted by Iran and that Greenland was merely a hollow shell with no one truly watching the back door. In their minds, the Arctic was an unpoliced playground where they held the initiative. Then everything fell into a haunting silence. No signals, no contact, not a single trace remained. It was the terrifying stillness of an ocean holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The discovery of the Belgorod was no accident of fate. It was the culmination of a high-stakes intelligence dragnet. Following Russia's geopolitical strangulation in Iran, U.S. signals intelligence intercepted a critical burst of encrypted traffic from the Russian Naval High Command to the Severodvinsk submarine base. This wasn't just chatter, it was the birth of a desperate redemption strike. When advanced satellites began detecting thermal scars, anomalous shifts in water temperature and salinity caused by the Belgorod's massive 190-megawatt nuclear reactor, the Pentagon knew exactly what was happening. Russia was doubling down in the high north. The danger of this environment cannot be overstated. In the eternal twilight of the Arctic, hunting beneath 10-foot ice is a suicidal endeavor. Massive undersea ice keels, some plunging dozens of feet deep, act as jagged knives capable of disemboweling a submarine in a heartbeat. A single collision would turn a multi-billion-dollar vessel into an unmarked iron tomb. U.S. intelligence, however, was too calculating to gamble on a blind underwater duel. Instead of a direct confrontation, they chose a lower-risk, technologically overwhelming approach. 3:20 a.m., as the Arctic winds howled, P-8A Poseidon reconnaissance aircraft slipped out of the shadows, flying at dangerously low altitudes to duck beneath the radar horizons of Russian MiG-31s stationed along the Kola coast. The American crews executed their mission with surgical precision. They targeted polynyas, natural fractures in the ice that the Kremlin believed were NATO's blind spots. Hundreds of ultra-sensitive ASQ-125 sonobuoys were dropped through these cracks, sinking into the dark abyss like digital anchors.
3:22 a.m. At Ice Camp Boarfish, the Tactical Operations Center vibrated with the hum of servers as data streamed in from the buoy network. The Arctic was no longer a void. It had been upgraded into a fully integrated digital battle space, a transparent glass chessboard. On the tactical displays, the rhythmic hum of the Belgorod's pump jet propulsion materialized with terrifying clarity. Target acquired, bearing 035, range 12 nautical miles. She's deploying the first Harmony sensor node. It was the ultimate high-tech hunt, like deploying a swarm of smart cameras to track a predator in a forest rather than wading through the mud to find it. 3:28 a.m. Belgorod didn't flinch when its acoustic sensors picked up the familiar ping from Western sonar buoys. On the contrary, the Russian captain, a Cold War veteran, immediately decided to turn his colossal vessel into bait. He ordered the activation of Silent Hunter mode, coordinating seamlessly with the Harmony sensor network they had begun weaving along the seabed. From Belgorod's dedicated launch tubes, a swarm of Clavison UUVs was released. These drones were not mere scouts, they were master decoys. Using low-frequency amplifiers, each UUV began emitting a perfect acoustic simulation of Belgorod itself, from turbine hums to propeller beats. They dispersed in 3 separate directions. 3:30 a.m. At the U.S. monitoring station, a single target suddenly multiplied into 5 identical signals. The combat screen descended into chaos as 5 Belgorods maneuvered along complex trajectories. U.S. acoustic specialists were thrown into a deadly auditory maze, forced to spread their resources thin just to determine which entity was real. Just as the Americans scrambled, electronic warfare stations on the Kola Peninsula opened fire into cyberspace. A high-intensity GPS spoofing attack was launched. They weren't blocking sonar signals, they were distorting their coordinates. The maps on P-8A Poseidons and sonar buoy positions began dancing across screens, completely disrupting real-time data fusion. U.S. officers now saw not only multiple targets, but could not accurately locate them in physical space. The Russian captain lured one ghost deep into the treacherous underwater canyons near Franz Josef Land. This area was a nightmare of rugged terrain and dense thermal layers, where sudden temperature shifts bent acoustic waves, creating massive sonar blind zones. Only the Russians had detailed maps of this labyrinth. 3:33 a.m. Inside Ice Camp Boarfish, tension hung like a taut wire. American officers stared at signals fading into the void. The real vessel has only 60 seconds before it dives beneath the thermal layer. If we chase the wrong ghost into the canyon, we'll lose him forever. He faced a life-or-death choice: gamble on a single signal and risk collision, or hold position and let Belgorod vanish. On board Belgorod, the captain leaned back, smiling under the dim red lights of the control deck. Welcome to our under-ice labyrinth. Now the real game begins. The Russian commander steered the Belgorod with a reckless, arrogant confidence. To him, the jagged canyons and thick thermal layers near Franz Josef Land were an impregnable acoustic fortress, a realm where sonar waves were bent and shattered. He believed the Americans were still chasing acoustic ghosts in open water, but this security was a carefully orchestrated illusion. The U.S. Navy wasn't fooled. They were herding the Russian giant directly into a pre-designated dead zone. 3:45 a.m. The unnatural silence of the Arctic was ripped apart. At a nearby Polinia, the very ice fracture the Belgorod had just glided beneath, a series of sharp, compressed explosions echoed through the deep. These were not random. U.S. micro-UUVs had pre-positioned shaped directional charges. The 10-foot-thick ice didn't just break, it expanded and fractured in a perfect geometric pattern, creating a clean, surgical breach in the polar crust. From the swirling mist of ice shards, the black steel mass of the USS Delaware performed a vertical surfacing. It was a 7,800-ton predator, rising like a vengeful soul. By breaching directly off the Belgorod's stern, the Delaware had shattered the illusion of Russian Arctic dominance with one act of violent emergence. The nightmare for the Kremlin was no longer a shadow, it was a physical steel reality. As the Russian sonar techs panicked, two new ghosts appeared from strategic vectors. The HMS Astute and FS Safran emerged from the shadows. They held ambush positions in absolute silence. Unlike the Delaware, they did not surface. They maintained silent hunter mode, locking the Belgorod into their torpedo crosshairs with sniper precision. Surrounded by three of the world's elite nuclear assassins, the Russian captain faced a paralyzing hesitation.